I'm here with Gerald Knezek. Is that how you pronounce it?
Knezek, it's pretty close.
Knezek. Oh, okay,
Yes. Yeah.
fantastic. And Fred, I don't know what because your last name's up here, not up here, and
It's
I
yeah,
forget
it's
it.
Fred McMahan.
Fred McMahan, and Gerald Knezek. Okay,
Almost.
all right.
Almost.
And so I guess we'll start with Gerald. Can you give me your background, please, and just some information about who you are
Sure.
and what you do?
Gerald Knezek here. I'm in my 41st year at UNT. I'm a Regent Professor of Learning Technologies. I work a lot with STEM education and initiatives, and so that's how we got involved with NASA starting in 2015 or 16, and have been there ever since.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, and Fred.
Yeah, so I'm an assistant professor in learning technologies. And haven't been here quite as long as Gerald, but uh, hopefully I'll be an associate professor next year. And then my main area of background is actually lately in a lot of development of next generation tech. And so we're really focused on what's going to be coming down the road 10 years from now, you know, that we can prepare our students for and actually just preparing the world for it as well, if that kind of makes sense. So, because the we are moving at a light speed pace now with technology, and we have to try to stay ahead of it. So,
And I'll say Pat Haas and Carolyn Ning did a wonderful job of presenting that. This was at site. And again, Elena, I've had a 29-year history with the Society for Information Technology and Teacher Education. And so they're the ones that teach technology techniques to the future teachers. And so this was a presentation there, and it was well received. I think I'm not sure how many of you were there in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas Earth Arboretum, but quite a few of your group, and they were tried out. Ours was not actually put together yet. Pat Haas gave me our kit the next day, and so I'll get to that in a moment, but there were several of these tried out, and I was always amazed. I wish I could make my graphs look like these two. That I think maybe Paul, you made that graph. I'm not sure, but ours lines up quite nicely. And of course, we had lots of different locations. You can see in the picture with Pat. This was the day before. It was Saturday before the Monday eclipse, and Fred was there too. Middle school teachers in the picture that came from the neighborhood schools, though most of them have been with us for 15 years also. So the theme you'll find is we're kind of in it for the long haul. And I'm hoping that's why I'm so glad Fred is here. My long haul might not be too many more years, but I think he's got quite a few in him. And I think this was Pat Haas's measure of the UV and several other things that changed during the eclipse. And I'm sure you've all seen this picture in the explanations. This was from our instrument that was um, let's see, this is about May the 11th. Actually, on May the 10th, what happened, and I had no idea, I wasn't watching things, but this picture was sent at 3 a.m. from Seattle by my son. He was May the 10th, he was outside and said, "Hey, Dad, I think you're going to have a time to turn your meter on." My wife had a craft fair 8 hours the next day in Flower Mound, so I took literally our black version of this meter, just set it on the picnic table and turned it on and let it run for 7 hours. And that's where these graphs came from. I didn't know it was going to kind of blow the top out. And the other Pat from used to be from NASA headquarters. I've forgotten his last name. He was in Alaska with us. He was most impressed with this picture, the one that I don't know if you can see the screen, the black ziggly lines,
yep,
because we
we can see
tried
it.
to we did a careful well, I will say Paul just graduated in computer science, so he's like Fred's understudy in some ways, but so his Python code is magical, and I said, hey, can you overlay what we saw on top of the, I think it's the DST index there. And so really what happens locally is much more zigzaggy than what you see on the smooth curve. The red line is from NOAA, and the black line is what I recorded that day from the picnic table with the Stella instrument pointing straight up and just running. And so I think there's a lot of local variation probably everywhere, but probably you already knew that. But I was a little surprised. Also, we we converted to KP, and Paul will kill me now, but I found that through our AI chatbots, it said, "Hey, if you just divide all the total color spectrum irradiances by two, it'll be pretty close." And so that's what we use, and it turns out it lines up. So when you sum whatever came out of the Helio-STELLA on the color spectrums and then divide it by two, that's this line. And for whatever reason, Paul, I'm sure you will tell me it makes no sense at all. It kind of lines up quite well. So that's the limit of my prediction science. In any case, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're really interested in this whole sunburn thing. It became popular in all of our schools since Jimmy Buffett died of skin cancer. And it wasn't the students who knew who he was until their teachers came and said, "Hey, you guys better put on sunscreen when you're out in the sun." And again, places like Hawaii or Florida or all of Texas. It's very important. This was our version of the UV. So you probably never heard of Roger Wagner, but he's been a colleague for 40 years. He was a HyperStudio creator, and now he does Arduino kits and stuff. And so he made me a famous Roger pizza box with a UV meter. And my son, that's a Microsoft computer engineer, hooked it up to his Surface Pro in my yard in Flower Mound and recorded all day long while we were at the Arboretum. So this is where I tell people we kind of prove that you can't get sunburned during a total eclipse. And
Nice.
yeah, maybe that's obvious. But anyway, this is comparable to what comes out of the Helio-STELLA, but it was actually a pizza box running to an Arduino that was feeding a live feed into storage on a Microsoft Surface Pro. I think there's a picture maybe. Let's see if I find that. Oh, I'm going backwards. Oh, no, I'm not. It's not there, but we have that somewhere. The big crisis was the Surface Pro got too hot, so my son had to bring a fan outside, and then he turned upside down a clothes basket and made a cooling fan out of it and solved the crisis. So it sounds a little bit like Apollo 13, I guess. There. Okay, implications for teacher education. This is where I think there really is a future, and this is your forte. We know now that not just Fred and I, but there are a bunch of people all around us, teachers in particular, and also pre-service teachers, that we teach the technology integration course for all 400 pre-service candidates that graduate from UNT each year. And so that's a service course for our department, and we'd love to incorporate a component in that connected with our lab. But remote sensing instrumentation and all of those kinds of things, PBL, that's also in Fred's neck of the woods. And this was the summary that I believe Pat gave at that presentation. And I agree with all that. I think you've all heard. It's handheld, as Paul pointed out. You can hang it on the wall. It's easy to assemble. Probably even I could do it. The spectrometer is amazing. I'm amazed at how much it lines up. Like right now, I was recording 2 hours earlier. We have about a KP 4.5 right now going on. And so when it's above 4, I try to grab it. But they're 3 hours behind. And Paul, this is a compliment to you. I just started looking at the sum of the stellar radiances and go, oh, it's going up. And so I keep it running. Otherwise, as Fred points out, sometimes when it gets above 110 in Texas, it still melts the case. So we have to worry a little bit about that. But the instruments work quite well. Well, end of presentation. Thank you. I hope it wasn't too fast or too scattered.
In your presentation, we saw Stella being used at the Dallas Cotton Ball and Dallas Arboretum during the 2024 eclipse, right? Uh, what unique data were you able to collect during these events that might not have been possible without a Helio-STELLA.
Yeah, and
Or just what data did you collect, basically?
sure, I'll review that too. But before I forget, I wanted to show, I guess, in the camera, the latest one. That's Fred's creation, where he added a magnetometer. And I'm anxious to carry this. I actually recorded some data earlier today. It's only about a KP3 this afternoon, but uh, for trying to figure out how can we get a simple formula that middle school kids would understand. That is, as far as if they were out in the afternoon sun recording data. And so far now, to get to your point, we still have good success with teachers and teachers to be, and even parents and kids, with giving them a set of binoculars where they can still see sunspots during the current cycle phase. And I always remind them of when my flights used to be diverted 11 years ago when we were flying a little bit more around the world, around the North Pole side. And it's not so frequent anymore, but occasionally it still happens. So, how is it relevant to the real world? What did we find from the Cotton Bowl and so forth? Is we always have to wait at least 3 to 6 hours before we knew if there were solar storms coming or whatever. And it was usually after the fact. And now we've learned, since I was a former math major, to sort of look at the curve and see where it's going and put our Stella out when we think it's going to be something exciting. Or as I think I mentioned when we last met, that my son at 3 in the morning for me had texted me on May the 10th because he was outside of Seattle camping and said, wow, look at these auroras. And so since my wife had a craft fair event all day the next day, I just set our Stella out on the table, and it's some of the best data we've ever gotten, including during the eclipse over the years. And so you just never know, but actually instant, just in time. Like we had a big storm here yesterday, but it's no clouds at all today. So I stuck my Stella out for an hour, and I'm anxious to get home and put the data in a spreadsheet and see how it lines up with what the official people got. But I think I also might have mentioned to some of you, if you've been in the sessions before, what we really find is that our local K index just jumps around a lot compared to what we get from NOAA. And we think our data, the points are real. And so it gives me a whole new perspective, and a lot of people also, that local variations might be very important sometimes. And I might have mentioned, I'm not sure, I even think that especially on 90.1 megahertz, where I listen to the radio a lot, when I'm driving into work about 30 minutes, if the static is so bad that I hardly can hear, we're almost 50 miles outside of Dallas. That if it's, I immediately go and Google and see what the KP index is, and if it's high, then I stick our Stella out and see what it really was. And so with that, I don't know, maybe I'll turn this over to Fred for a bit, because he was actually in the formal training the day before the eclipse, or 2 days before, that was brought to us by your colleagues at Goddard at NASA. So Fred, a little bit for you.
And I think the biggest thing too that was found was, there's that myth that the UV shoots up, right? When you, during a solar eclipse, right? So, it's dangerous to be outside because the UV is higher at that point. But the Stella proved and showed that that wasn't actually the case, right? The UV just completely goes away. And we could see that in the Helio-STELLA. And as far as the education standpoint, I mean, teaching the color spectrums and understanding where the color light comes from, I think is very beneficial and in doing that. And adding the magnetometer hopes to add just a little bit more to that data, right? So that, well, what exactly is happening during these solar events that we're getting, and how can we teach kids better ways to understand that and protect our planet in that sense. So what we need to do.
Beyond eclipse observations, and you already touched on this a bit, what are other heliophysics phenomena can Helio-STELLA help students observe and understand that might otherwise be inaccessible in typical classroom settings?
Well, I'll start with one. For me, when we say eclipse, everyone thinks total eclipse. But the annular one, when I was sitting in San Antonio, to me was almost just as fascinating. Actually, your eyes adjust during an annular eclipse, and probably you knew that, but I didn't. And so it was only the fact that, wait a minute, it started out at 92 degrees and then everyone got cold and we had to take blankets in San Antonio, Texas, take them outside on the deck. And so I was wondering, actually, I also had a UV sensor that was commercial that I was setting out to see if my eyes automatically adjusted and told my brain that it was still total daylight. What did the measurement show? And so I was only looking at the UV out of that at the time. But had I had a Helio-STELLA with me, this was October 2024, and we didn't have it yet. I would have really had a systematic view. And so I know that's eclipse again, but there, uh, if I could switch gears and then also go to Fred, because we really think, I think, in my younger days, I used to do a lot more of engineering design concepts and what we would call computational thinking. That is, what can you do with data that you could get from stuff that you're not quick enough or can't remember enough sets to do? And so I don't know, Fred, would you have ideas? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, so besides what I said before, I think the other thing that I would point out is it teaches STEM better, engineering better, specifically like programming and things like that. So giving it to a kid and saying, what can you do with it? And what could we tweak on it to make it do something that it didn't do before? Right. So it's giving that thinking about what, making them critically think about what you can do with this, right? Because they should be the ones coming up. We have ideas, but they should be the ones coming up with these new ideas and saying, oh, well, we should add a magnetometer to it so that we can see what's happening at, different positions and things like that. And so I think that's probably, for me, one of the biggest things that I think is the benefit to this tool is that it provides that conduit to give a kid the ability to easily add something to it or think of something themselves to do and use that data in new ways that maybe you wouldn't even thought about in the past.
And the presentation identifies remote sensing, spectrum analysis, instrumentation, and fabrication as key areas where Helio-STELLA supports teacher education. Which of these areas have you found teachers struggle with the most, and how does Helio-STELLA or just Stella in general help address these types of challenges? And this could go to both you, Gerald, and Fred.
First. Yeah.
I think it's the accessibility to the resources, right, and clear instructions. So teachers are very busy people, right? They're very overworked. And I think, one of the benefits that we had was during the eclipse is the Heliophysics had come in and they were given sessions to teachers to train them on these kind of tools. And I think it would be good, almost like if there was like, and there may be already out there, but almost like a series where teachers could watch videos or watch these types of instrumentations to give them ideas. A lot of it is just verbal documentation. It's a lot of to read and things like that. And I noticed there's quite a bit of change that happens on the website and things kind of get shifted around and lost. And um, I think that would be a great benefit to them to make them more engaged to it. You have to account for their time. If you want them to use these tools, you have to make it viable for them to use it, because they don't have time to go spend hours upon hours learning these things. And it's more like a simplification. The documentation is done very well, but I think that it still needs to be taken to another level to make it even easier for these teachers.
Could I add one or two there?
Oh yeah, please.
Oh yeah, there. If I would say that if I could divide teachers or potential teachers into two groups, one is the in-service teacher group, and they really only have time for some kind of quick make it, take it. They're something with a takeaway. So if the third grade teacher has kids growing bean plants, they need a very clearly documented, easy to use, easy to implement system, like Fred was mentioning, so that they could just come in, turn it on, and have third graders do it, and it would be meaningful. I mean, the pictures on the screen, everybody now has projection capabilities, so that's in-service teachers. We also teach the technology tools for educators course to all pre-service teachers at UNT. That'll be about 750 new ones each year. We usually catch them in their second year for our required course of technology integration. I wish that we would have every one of those pre-service teachers go through a lab hands-on exercise where they do some of the fabrication. My own children, two and maybe all three of them, got their college research assistantships because they knew how to solder and use a pair of pliers and a screwdriver. It's unusual, especially for anyone who's going to be a teacher these days. I mean, maybe they can use Google everything, but ask them to fix the doorknob, and it will, I won't say impossible, they've just never been exposed to that kind of stuff. But the next generation, I think, like Fred said, we need STEM education everywhere. STEM as a tool for solving the world's problems is really a root. And so there's very little hands-on touch it kind of activities. And even just popping these components together would be something that would be manageable in a 3-hour unit, and then require them to do a little micro project where they would do something innovative. By the end of our, simple 3 credit hour service course, that would be wonderful, in my opinion. A hands-on lab activity. We're right across the hall from an engineering school at our university. They all have labs all the time. So why don't we for pre-service teachers?
Your slides mentioned problem-based learning (PBL) as a key pedagogical. That's fun to say. Pedagogical approach with Helio-STELLA. Could you share a specific example of a successful PBL implementation that improves student outcomes or teacher confidence? Say hopefully with Helio-STELLA.
Well, I guess I would go back to the earliest Stella example when the co-director of our center here, where we're sitting, Dr. Christensen, was a former third grade teacher. And when Paul came, she said, "Wow, I used to have my kids grow bean plants. And could we have them test it with Stella like every week in the window or maybe even every day?" And Paul just pulled it out and said, "Well, why don't you try it?" And so she did, and that convinced us that any teacher could actually do that. We didn't actually have her grow a bean plant there, but we found various levels of plants and then pulled the SD card out and looked at them on the screen and could see that any teacher that was not terribly afraid of touching an SD card or knew how to use any kind of a spreadsheet program could do this. And so that was one example very early on. Yeah, and I think probably Fred's already mentioned a little of this, but I know we're so happy he's here because of, I'll call it the computational thinking aspect of it. This whole idea of you find a problem if you're at all versed in PBL type learning, whether it's a project or problem-based learning in your vocabulary. I think there's great potential for that. And actually, a lot of our faculty even are not schooled anymore in these techniques. And it's something we're really going to be in trouble for if we don't convey it to the next generation.
Well, and that's one of the things
Absolutely.
that was one of the things I was just thinking about because um, teaching kids critical thinking is now harder than ever before because we have these tools that don't make you have to critically think anymore,
Mhm.
right? Chat GPT, things like this, so kids can just go get the answer faster than they used to just Google it, right? So when I was a kid and Google came out, I was like, oh, I can get the answer by Googling it. Now it's even faster, right? And so you have to develop tools that the tools to still teach critically thinking. Sorry, tools that teach critically thinking that are um, can't be solved by Chat GPT, right? They can't be done by these generative AI systems like the Stella, right? Putting your hands on this physical device and you're learning it, you're actually getting the hands-on experience and giving them the ability to critically think about it. Now they could use those to help them understand it a little bit better, but at the end of the day, they still have to put their hands on it, work with it, which makes it physical so that they can still develop those skills.
Fantastic. All right. And then, so this also gets to the future of the Helio-STELLA as well. So looking forward, what enhancements or new applications for Helio-STELLA are you most excited about developing in the next, say, well, in the near future, say 1 to 3 years, possibly?
Right.
So I'm most interested in actually making like the data in real time on like a cell phone. So we could actually transmit it. So adding a Wi-Fi adapter, uh, making it transmittable to devices in real time. Because one of the things that is kind of missing right now is if you have a classroom of 30 students and you only have one of these devices, you know, sure, each one of them can get their turn to use these devices, but would be more interesting for them to be able to watch what's happening in real time, not necessarily just, looking at the screen or pulling the SD card out and then loading the data, but if they could see it in real time. So my thought process was, well, let's install a Wi-Fi adapter and then we can just transmit the data to a web page or an app on a phone so that we could communicate this and see things in real time, generate graphs in real time, right? Instead of having to take the Excel spreadsheet and plot the graph, we could just do it in real time. And then maybe even some machine learning, some on this data, there's some things that we can do with it. But hardware wise, it's just how much can we cram into this and, make it awesome for kids to use and easy for teachers to use.
And yeah, my dream is similar, but actually simpler than Fred's. I I remember when we didn't have webcams, and now on the 6 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news, especially, not only is there a UV index where they give it during the weather forecast, but they often, if we have stormy weather, show the webcam from our football stadium and from several other universities in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Why? What if we had Fred's kind of system and it fed into the 6 o'clock or the 10 o'clock news, and they would switch over to the stellar readings. And especially during time when some of your colleagues from NASA would say in advance that, hey, we're predicting a solar storm. And and so I think that the whole public kind of awareness of all of this is prime. The technology is here now, thanks to all of you guys. Uh, to make this something that the whole public could be aware of. And so maybe we would actually have first graders that go, oh, I want to come here because you have Stella.
Having crazy ideas that are not practical at all, while valuing teammates who make those ideas workable. Could you share an example of how this dynamic led to important innovation in the Helio-STELLA project or Stella projects?
Uh,
That's I got to think about that one.
That's a great.
uh, from my personal experience, I think it's that and this is going to sound crazy, but when I first started looking into adding more sensors to it, I started going through all the sensors you could get, right? So you actually go through and you start looking at all the sensors, and this really starts populating ideas in your head, like, oh, I could put this in here. Oh, I can add this. Oh, there's like gesturing sensors where you can gesture, and maybe we could switch the button out to be like a gesture, like, just because everybody's used to that type of interface now, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing is it's just the creativity that it allows you to have, right? And you want to pass that on to everybody on the team, right? So you get with somebody and you're like, hey, we could do this. We have to figure this out. We have to figure that out. And then there's a lot of potential for it, right? So you want to pass that on to teachers, and you also want to pass that on to kids because that gets them interesting, right? As we've been talking, right? As you said, nerding out about this, that's what makes it enjoyable. And if you enjoy something, you're going to want to spend more time doing it, and you're going to learn more about it. And doing that kind of stuff helps kids learn better, in my opinion. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing about it is just having that open source kind of concept where you could say, oh, we could do this and think outside the box and change it and do it. And that makes it better, in my opinion. So,
Yeah, and maybe I'd like to go back to ancient history just for a minute. In 1977, I was a new graduate student at the University of Hawaii, and I I found out that they had this system called PSAT, Pan-Pacific Education and Communications Experiments by Satellite. It was ATS-1 based to begin with after it finished its mission. And by the way, my first trip to Goddard ever was to see the replica of the ATS-1 that they still had there. This was in the early 80s at the time. Application Technology Satellite 1. It was the first one to send faxes. It was a high frequency. I'm an amateur radio operator. So for me, this was second nature, sort of. I think 149 megahertz up and 135 down, if I remember correctly. So it was a push to talk. However, microcomputers had just come out. The Apple II, I remember we had about a half dozen or so that came in 1978, and they couldn't talk over ATS-1. The stations, the headquarters were Honolulu and New Zealand, Wellington, New Zealand, for ATS-1. And at the time, it was the only way during certain times of the year the people at the South Pole could communicate because the currently available satellite network wasn't that prominent. They were mostly geostationary orbit around the equator, more or less. And so depending on the tilt, couldn't reach the South Pole. But what we used to talk about, dream about, especially a colleague who was in Fiji and one in American Samoa, Suva, they were saying, well, can't we get these Apple IIs to send stuff over ATS-1? And so someone figured out if we shorted out the CR1 diode in the 300 baud modem, that it would trick the computer, and actually you could send even without the return circuit that was required. And the standards for modem communications. That's kind of what I used to teach in network operating systems. So you have to send and then also have a receipt and verify the data in our current protocols. But you can't do that in a push to talk one way at a time, CB radio kind of satellite. So we had fun for more than fun. Actually, we started sending lots of interesting and valuable data. And eventually, when I first came to UNT, we found out by then it was ATS-3 that was parked over Easter Island, as I recall it. And it would reach Texas. So we actually built a satellite relay on our roof in our education building, and for 2 or 3 years talked on that. And many school districts actually in our area, especially rural ones, they actually install their own dishes just so they could talk to people like in Hawaii and New Zealand. And so when I first saw Stella, I had sort of flashbacks back to ATS-1, like, wow, this is satellite technology I never dreamed about. Now it's in my hand. And so, uh, well, that's just the beginning of the story, but maybe it gives you the idea. I think the potential is just unlimited.